Another week, another Unlapped. Guys, hi. Also, plural, guys. Gang's all here. How is everybody?
Good, thank you. I feel a little bit bad actually because I left Nate rather in the lurch last week
Just just a
with
bit.
the biggest news story certainly of the year, probably since Lewis Hamilton said he was going to Ferrari, and I went to a lovely place in the United Kingdom called Cornwall and got away from it all. So thank you, Nate. I'll
No,
say
no
this
worries,
on the
mate. I
record.
mean,
Thank you very much for covering us, and you did a remarkable job. I listened to the podcast you guys put out. I thought it was fantastic at responding to the news, to be honest.
It was fantastic. We're gonna hold that over him for a while. Make him. What was that? What was that podcast? By the way, this is Unlapped. We are presented by Oracle. Right now, Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to OCI. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com. Remember, if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe. Also, remember the ESPN F1 YouTube channel is where you will find us all year round, not just during the season. That's where you can get all of your F1 content at all times. And if you're listening somewhere else, cool, great, don't care. Just make sure you hit us up with the 5-star review. Okay, since we're all back, and since last weekend or last week was the crazy Christian Horner news, it doesn't it doesn't really feel like it's slowed down at all because now we've sort of launched into this idea of silly season. And I think that's how we're going to spend this week talking about some of the ridiculous rumors. Some of them are more ridiculous than others. Some of them feel a little more based in fact. But I also like the fact that we now live in a world where AI can make up some truly ridiculous and let's just go with it. There are 2 races left until the summer break. Obviously, Spa is next weekend. And this is sort of the part of the season where it gets a little rumor heavy when it comes to driver lineups for 2026. And there was allegedly the secret meeting between Verstappen and Toto Wolff. There are some yachts being tracked that belong to both of them. First of all, I want to live in a world where I have a yacht, you have a yacht, and then we can all just be tracked by them. There were
just track each other's yachts all day.
right,
That'd be great.
oh, let's track each other's yacht. Where do you want to take your yacht today? Sardinia? Okay. I'd rather go to the Greek Isles. I don't know, something ridiculous like that. But this was allegedly off the coast of Italy where these two guys met in their fake yachts, or no, in their yachts with their fake photos. But then Mercedes came out and was like, no, there was no face-to-face meeting that actually happened. So all of this is going viral on social media. There are these AI photos. Meanwhile, what is actually happening?
I'm not sure a huge amount is happening because I
Okay.
think what's happened here with this is, like you said, Nicole, we had the Christian Horner news last week. Then everyone gets very excited. I'm also amazed that people seem to know in advance. They're like, oh, like Max Verstappen's going here this weekend. I'm like, how do you know that? Like,
Right.
how, like, what do you follow? And it's not just him. It's with all the drivers. They're like, oh, he's going to San Marino next week. What are you talking? I don't understand how people know this stuff. But it was interesting to follow on Twitter or X. People getting more and more excited about these two yachts kind of being in the vague vicinity of each other, and obviously with the backdrop of we've heard the Max Verstappen Mercedes rumors for a long, long time. But speaking to people at Red Bull and speaking to certainly some people I know who are very close on the Verstappen side, they said this trip was planned for a long, long time, and it's not that unusual that there's certain areas of the world where these guys seem to all end up. I mean, if you look at where they all live and where they ended up, it's not
Right.
it's not the furthest stretch to go. I forget exactly where it was, but in 2020, all the drivers seem to randomly end up in the same spot for holiday. I forget the place, but there was this joke that they just all were in the same resort. So I think that I'm not saying there's nothing going on at all in the Max Mercedes camp, but I think this weekend there was a lot of nothing going on. People assuming that this was going to be done succession style. And I think, to be honest with you, if there are discussions going on with Max Verstappen and Mercedes, I imagine a lot of them have been done already, in terms
Yeah.
of pre-agreements, in terms of understanding where each other are. From what I understand, Verstappen and his camp know roughly the kind of ballpark figure Mercedes might offer if a deal was forthcoming. Doesn't mean one is forthcoming. We hear in Formula One quite a lot about what's called a pre-agreement, which is basically one team says to a driver, hey, if you're free in a year, 2 years, here's theoretically what we might offer you. Hypothetically, are you interested? And the driver says, yeah, hypothetically we would be. And things get signed to that nature. None of it binding. but it gives all these teams an idea of kind of what the market is. And like Carlos Sainz, I remember having a few of those during his Ferrari time, or at least them being reported. So that in itself wouldn't be that surprising. But the idea that they're doing this 2 weeks before the summer break, getting all their ducks in a row, I don't quite buy it. I think that, Max Verstappen, especially when he leaves the Formula One track, I think the last thing he wants to do is spend a day of his hard-earned holiday talking to Toto Wolff on a yacht about a move that may or may not happen. And we
That
don't know
seems so
if
totally Verstappen because he loves like all of that stuff so
Yeah,
much.
exactly. And also the other thing that people are missing with this because I keep getting messages from people saying, "Has Max signed for Mercedes?" He cannot sign anything
Mhm.
until the start of the summer break. When that checkered flag drops at Hungarian Grand Prix, if he's fourth, from what I understand, and from what all the reporting has been around it, away from ESPN as well, that would open that up to him. Now, I don't know if there's other clauses that exist within that, but if he's third and then the Hungarian Grand Prix finishes, it doesn't matter what he signed or what he wants to do. He physically can't leave. So I think it's all blown out of proportion a little bit because it's Max, because it's Mercedes. And part of me does wonder which side of the equation has enjoyed playing that side up more, the Max Verstappen
Ooh.
camp or Toto Wolff on his side, because he certainly hasn't done anything to quieten the noise. I'm not at all saying nothing's going on here, but I think it's interesting how excited people have gotten about it.
Can I vote on that?
Yeah.
I honestly think the excitement and like the chaos and the you know what stirring, I think Max probably enjoys that more because think about it from the Mercedes side. Mercedes still has to deal with George and Kimi Antonelli, and some of the chaos and some of the rumors aren't making it for like a happy situation over there. Like it's not a happy marriage, it's not a happy honeymoon, whatever it is that you want to describe that. So the chaos I think it's more enjoyable from the Max side of things than it is from the Mercedes side of things. So, Lawrence, one of the things that obviously Nate just touched on is this clause in Max's contract. And we don't actually know the specifics of it. But can you go back and like remind us what that is and what that actually means and why he can't do anything until X, Y, and Z?
So it's performance clause which exists in a lot of contracts. Our understanding of it is if he's outside the top three at the summer break, he then has the ability to go and leave the Red Bull contract before it's due to finish, which is 2028. Of course, contracts can be bought out at any point in time. So if Mercedes, had the money to do so and came to an agreement with Red Bull and Max Verstappen made it very clear to Red Bull that he didn't want to be there, he wouldn't actually need the performance clause. It could be done. But of course, that's a very expensive way of getting a driver because likely Red Bull would want to make sure that Mercedes pay for that privilege of taking Verstappen off him. So I think that's what we're waiting on. I mean, this Sardinia thing I thought was pretty funny as well, because can you imagine you're trying to sign a contract like that and these guys literally live, a block or two away from each other
Right.
in Monaco. Yeah,
But
they
let's go
decided
to
to
Italy in our yachts.
so they decided to yacht down to Italy, down to
In full
Sardinia,
public view.
off the coast. Yeah, knowing that their yachts can be tracked by various different things, to then sign a deal, with this like sunset backdrop or whatever. It all seems incredibly far-fetched. I mean, it's good fun. And like Nate said, it's not to say there's no smoke without fire. It's not to say that, there haven't been talks already teeing something up for that moment where if he is outside the top four, then he goes for it. But the funny kind of quirk to all this kind of, outside the top three, but the funny quirk to all of this is that the driver that's most poised to knock him out of that position and open up this clause in the contract is George Russell,
George.
who is fourth in the championship, who of course would then be the most likely driver to be replaced at Mercedes if Max came in. So it's this kind of weird dynamic situation. I think increasingly, with the Horner news last week as well, increasingly it would make sense for Max to stay at Red Bull another year. Then you get the benefit of seeing where everything maps out in 2026 under new regulations, who's got the best engine, who's got a handle of the chassis, who's destroying their tires because of, whatever reason. And then you can make a decision based on that. And, to spend another year at Red Bull, I don't think would be too bad a thing, especially with this transition that Red Bull's making, because if Lauren Meckies, when he gets hold of everything and Red Bull above him, if they start making the moves that, say, Verstappen's camp always wanted within Red Bull, and they start seeing progress as a result of it, then perhaps they just stay there through to the end of his contract in 2028, which he knows and is lucrative. So I think, that there's a huge amount to play. And like Nate said, probably not a huge amount that's going to happen concretely until the summer break, which is still 2 races away.
It's the
And just
devil you know versus the devil you don't in this situation. Because
100%.
think about what Max wants. Max just wants to win.
Yeah.
And we're not even talking races, we're talking championship. And he knows who he's got. He knows what he's got, at least for the most part, if he stays at Red Bull. There are questions if he moves to Mercedes. And so it's like, why rush it?
Massively, and and just to pick up on what you've both said, but Nicole, what you're saying there, what Max wants is what he wants. I think it's actually important. So I've been looking a lot into this, the reporting that we did around when he signed this current contract he's on.
Yeah.
So the deal he's on, as Lawrence mentioned, till 2028. He signed that in March 2022, which was, a few months after Abu Dhabi. He'd just become a world champion at the time. So that's March 2022. His deal went till the end of 2023. So he had 2 years left. He signed a 5-year extension, which at the time I remember was such a big statement. He was saying, "Look, I'm here long term.
Yeah.
This is the place I'm going to," and it's obviously proven to be true. I'm going to win multiple championships here. Now, and this isn't just talking to people over the last week. I've heard this in time, and it's come back to me over the past couple of days, thinking about it since the Horner news, and as we've talked more about Max. But I think when that deal was signed, if you think about that time, March 2022, that was before Formula One had had a Miami Grand Prix, a Vegas Grand Prix, a movie, before we'd had an 11th team coming in, before the likes of Oracle were really embedded from America. You've got all these American sponsorships.
Yeah.
The value of F1 now has gone through the roof since that time, and it reminds me a bit of Scottie Pippen in The Last Dance when he's tied down to that deal that he signs just before the NBA explodes into popularity, and then a few years later he's looking at it and he's like, I'm actually kind of underpaid here. Now, the Verstappen deal was reported $50 million a year, which at the time brought him level with Lewis. But you might look at that now, especially if you're Max, and say, well, actually, I'm a 4-time world champion now. The sport is worth way more money than it was before. And I remember hearing in 2023 that the bonuses that were attached to Max's deal actually capped out at about 12 wins. So he was winning races that year when he went on that amazing run. And towards the end of it, and I'm not saying boohoo to Max because he's making a lot of money, but you think his agent gets part of that bonus, the bonuses, go to different places. Suddenly he wasn't getting anything. And there was a frustration in the camp of like, well, actually, this deal we've signed now, we'd like to get a new one. So Nicole, you said something really, when you voted that it's more beneficial for the Max side of things to have this Mercedes news out there. I actually agree with that because part of this as well, Red Bull have obviously spent the last couple of months thinking, we talked about it last week, which future do we want? The one with Horner and without Max, or the one with Max and without Horner? Obviously, they've gone towards the Max one, and you would assume that they are willing to pay up that amount to say, right, this is the amount we're gonna pay. So I don't actually think it's beyond the realm of possibility. I'm not, maybe not this year, because Lawrence made the point you don't want to tie yourself down long term. But I could see the end of all this just being Verstappen signs a bigger extension. He gets he gets a bit more money. He gets a bit more guarantee, because the one thing I do believe sincerely about Max is he loves the Red Bull company and what it means to him. I think that the Horner side of things, I think the two of them seem to have a decent relationship. But in terms of, you look at your Helmut Markos, you look at Mintzlaff and Mateschitz on the Austrian side, you look at Yediva on the majority shareholder. He has a lot of time for that team, and he's seen them slowly get better since he's been there. So while the engine project might be a question mark, he knows what he's dealing with Red Bull. So to your point, better the devil you know than the one you don't. He knows, look, we might be behind next year. He might be braced for that. But he might also say, but we were behind in the late 2010s when I got there. And by 21, we were fighting Lewis and winning the world championship. So I think that's quite an interesting one as well. I think everyone's just assumed that Verstappen's leaving Red Bull. If I had to pick, is he more likely to stay or leave? I think still leave eventually. But I could see a world now, especially with Horner not there, with this reset happening, Mackey's coming in, Lawrence alluded to all of that. I could see that being the outcome here. He just gets a massive new deal, and then he says, this is it now. The end of my career, I'm going, like, when that deal finishes, I'm done with F1, and I'm finishing with Red Bull as well. Because I think he genuinely does love the team, care about it, and see himself as a big part of its story. And yeah, I just thought I'd throw that in there because I think it's the interesting bit of the Max and Toto thing that no one's talking about, is the one person who has benefited from all this being out there is the bottom line of Max's next contract is going to be huge.
I don't disagree with you.
Yeah.
I don't disagree with you at all. I think that there is a large part of me that, if it's hard to put myself in Max's shoes, because in a lot of ways we're talking monopoly money and achievements that, like, none of us can really even Like we watch it happen, but can we grasp it? No, we can't. Um, I think if it was me though, I would play both ends against the middle because that's
Mm.
how you negotiate.
Yep.
I would play both ends against the middle and I would put myself in a position where I was the one making the decisions that were best for me. And I would get the extension. I would stay with the devil I know, watch what happens, but I would make damn sure that my contract, if I wanted to make a change, it would. So I agree with you. I think if we're talking about decisions right now, I think Max is going to stay at Red Bull for at least I don't know what the time is, but I don't think he will be outside of Red Bull next year. This is probably gonna come back to bite me, guys. But I
We've got a
think
nice
he's gonna
clippable
be
moment there, Nicole,
right
now.
here. Asterisk, she was wrong. No, but I think like I think that he will stay at Red Bull for the next call it year. But there's gonna be something in that contract that makes it sweeter for him
Mm.
but also makes it easier for him to make a change because Red Bull wants to keep him. He's in such a position of power. Red Bull not only wants to keep him, I think they need to keep him because we talked about this last week. What is the future without him? The pipeline is not super amazing at the moment. They don't have anyone in there that's like established that is the next, yes, that is the next sure thing. So not only do they want to keep him, they need to keep him. So he is in a total position of power of I want more money. I want to have a contract that reflects the value of not just Red Bull, but also Formula One. I want more bonuses. I need this. Otherwise, I'm walking. And he
But
can do all of those things.
I think the money side of it is fairly guaranteed when it comes to renegotiate. The thing that Max, I think, would probably value, I don't, it's hard to know without being Max.
Right.
Above that is the ability to fight for championships. So, if he puts, even if he puts another zero on his contract, but he's in, fighting for fourth and fifth place, I don't think that appeals to Max. I think there's other things Max would rather do in motorsport than be in a team that is not capable of winning races. And I think that's been clear throughout the season. If you listen to everything Max says, throughout all of the turmoil that's been at Red Bull, it's that, he wants the team to buckle down. He wants to have more performance on that car. And then I think that does play to his advantage of getting a big contract as well, because when teams look at how they're spending money, well, they're under a budget cap. So in terms of what they can add in terms of performance to the car through the wind tunnel and through, CFD and through the factory, it's all capped. But what isn't capped is driver salaries. So if you kind of look at Max and you think, well, I mean, compared to his teammates this year, he's been adding about 7/10 of a second. But even compared to a very, top level driver, if you're saying he's still capable of adding those 2/10 of a second, 1/10 of a second, that makes a difference, that brings a championship into view, then I think any team on the grid that has the ability to do so will pay out for, the salary that Max is looking for, because these teams are also now making big amounts of money, but they're so restricted on what they can spend in terms of car development. They have to look for other ways to bring performance. And if you've got someone like Max on the market, that's it. So I think from Max's perspective, no matter where he goes, whether he renegotiates with Red Bull, whether he looks to Mercedes, Aston Martin, as a potential down the line, maybe for 2027, I think he's looking for which team is going to deliver, which is why it absolutely makes sense to sit tight for another year, not commit to anything beyond the end of 2026 that you haven't already, and then reassess and then take your pick, win those extra championships, or at least be in a position where you can fight for those championships, and then consider doing all the other things that Max wants to do in his career. And I think the money will just come his way because he's that good.
Okay, so let me ask this question. Let's just pretend for a second that Max is really seriously considering the switch to Mercedes and that there's going to be a change in the driver lineup at Mercedes. Um, who is he replacing? Is he replacing George or is he replacing, hi, Cat coming in hot. Who is he replacing? Is he replacing George or is he replacing Kimmy?
I think George. I just don't. I think the better lineup is Verstappen and Russell. I just don't. I just. Yeah. It doesn't seem very Toto. I mean, it doesn't seem very Toto Wolff. I mean, this is the only. Toto was a very pragmatic guy. I feel like him giving a young guy a debut and then kicking him to the curb or loaning him out, it just doesn't really fit with what I think of Toto Wolff. So, and the way he approaches things. So I would imagine he's replacing Russell here, but that is a fascinating one as well because the Russell Verstappen lineup, if you can get that, to Lawrence's point about adding performance, I mean that is the best lineup you could probably get in Formula One. You know, bar adding Lewis and Verstappen or something like that. You know, it's pretty strong. But I don't know. I still just think with all the baggage with Russell and Verstappen as well, I don't know whether they'd really want to put that together.
Yeah, I don't think there's a question here. I think George Russell goes if they can sign Max, not least because you then have this perfect situation, which is something that Mercedes have always tried to do with their young drivers, where you have the kind of more senior one, then you have the younger one, and then you have the one outside F1. And so you've got this, constant coming through pipeline of drivers, but with the correct separation of years between them, so that you don't end up with the kind of Red Bull situation where it all gets a bit messy and there's no one clear favorite to move forward. Mercedes has been very careful with that, and Antonelli has been their man throughout that. Now, it would be very unfortunate for George Russell because at one stage he was that young driver coming through at Mercedes. If he gets replaced by Max Verstappen, but then it's Max Verstappen. He's a four-time world champion, and George, no matter what his potential is, doesn't have that currency in the bank to be able to compete with that. So you'd also have a situation where Antonelli would learn a huge amount from Max. So in terms of they really do at Mercedes believe that Antonelli is going to be an absolute star of the future. In terms of finding and every single ounce of performance from Antonelli, having him alongside Max, learning from Max, would work remarkably well. And what's more, there's actually a good relationship between those two already. Antonelli a couple of times has gone up to Max and kind of Max has put his arm around his shoulder. Even when they crashed in Austria, Max didn't go crazy at Antonelli, even though it was 100% Antonelli's fault. So
it helped him with that clause. That's why. Helped him
what was that?
with it helped him with the performance clause, didn't it?
It did.
Antonelli.
Well,
Antonelli took him out. He was probably like, "Thanks very much, mate. Appreciate that."
Yeah. I mean, but he's going to love George even more if George gets him, out of that position by getting the points necessary.
Okay, so that's where I was going to go next. So if I'm George, I'm maybe not trying to get up into third in the championship right now. I'm not going out there and tanking. I'm not going out, but I don't blame him either. There's self-preservation. That's my job. That's my seat. This is what I want to do. Not that long ago, I was considered the veteran driver of the team. This was supposed to be my thing. And now I'm being considered the one to be out. Why would I do something to jeopardize all of that? So if I'm going into the next couple of races and my name is George Russell, I might not try to get ahead of him on the track. I might not have the best performance in that car. Guys, I don't know what's wrong. Guys, this is all I got. Sorry, man. This is the best I can do. That's just me. Let's get to the stat of the week. It's brought to you by Oracle. Right now, Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to OCI. You can see if your company qualifies at oracle.com/unlapped. And it is about Toto Wolff because I think one of the things that we have forgotten about, especially in light of how good Red Bull has been the last handful of years, is what Toto Wolff has done as the team principal at Mercedes. Toto Wolff has won 8 Constructors' Championships, and that's the second most by a team principal in F1 history, period. Done. He trails only Frank Williams, who won it 9 times, who was a team principal for nearly 50 years. So what Toto is trying to do is get back to that, and then we're looking again at Formula One history. Let's talk about some of the other seats that are available. Obviously, we don't really know if the Mercedes seat is officially available, but let's say it is. So 2 new teams, obviously. We've got Audi and Cadillac. Although Audi is there now with stake, but Cadillac is brand new. That's an entirely two new seats. A new venue in Madrid in 2026, and then the driver lineups. So if we're doing the math on this, it looks like there might be 8 open seats. You've got 1 at Alpine, the 2 Cadillac seats. What's going on at Mercedes? 2 Racing Bulls seats, and then 1 Red Bull seat. So we already talked about the Max Mercedes.
Mm-hmm.
Let's hit up the Racing Bulls situation. What does the future look like there? And how does that impact what Red Bull does in the future with either Yuki or a Max open seat? What does that look like?
So I think, I mean, you just mentioned 8 potentially open seats or 8 seats that we haven't had confirmed. If Max stays where he is, I think that really does reduce massively to two Cadillac seats, an Alpine seat, and probably one Racing Bull seat. And I think what will be interesting now, or going into the next few races, will just be to see what Red Bull looks like under Laurent Mekies. And remember, Laurent Mekies is a person who was team principal at Racing Bulls, but has also a long history at that team before that. Of course, he was Ferrari deputy team principal, but before that, he was at Toro Rosso. So I think he knows what young drivers need. And I think all those three young drivers that are currently at the Red Bull family, and I'm kind of including Yuki Tsunoda there. He's been their team boss, and he's seen the best of them. He's seen the absolute best of them. And so I think if there's anyone who can get the best out of those three drivers, then it's going to be Mekies in that position. But then how that figures out into 2026 will be interesting, because if Yuki continues on this path, it's a really hard sell to keep him there. But then you've got the decision of, well, who are you going to replace Yuki with? And Liam Lawson, we saw how much he struggled going into this season, making the Red Bull step up. And then are you going to burn through Hadjar in the same way you did with Lawson? So the way I see it, like, Hadjar's done everything you'd expect for a rookie. So his seat is safe. I think sensibly staying at Racing Bulls for another season. And then it's a question of, who's best to partner Max, if you do have Max going forward. And then it's the other aspect to all this is Arvid Lindblad, who's their driver in F2, who's looking very competitive. If he goes and wins the F2 championship, he will be looking to progress straight up to F1. Even if he doesn't, I think it might make sense to move him up to Racing Bulls. So then it's down to Lawson and Tsunoda and how they perform over the rest of the year, and whether they can do a convincing enough job to warrant a stay in their positions. But I think in Mekies, they all of a sudden, actually, both of those drivers will be feeling a little bit more comfortable than when Horner was at the top of that tree, and kind of there was a slightly more brutal approach to it. Of course, Helmut Marko is still actually in charge of that whole program, and we know how cutthroat he can be.
Right.
But I think both of them will feel now, at least they'll have until the end of this season to prove what they can do and put in a performance that keeps them at that team. But yeah, with Lindblad coming in, I suspect maybe Lawson would be the driver to drop if he can't perform for the rest of the season. We saw him good in Austria, but can he keep doing that? And then it's the same with Tsunoda. If Tsunoda just continues to fail to score in the Red Bull, then probably that's his career over as well, at Red Bull at least.
I do wonder with Mekies being there, I think that might actually help Lawson stay in a weird way, because I think, because Mekies has always talked very highly about him. But yeah, I think that's actually the bigger headache because the Red Bull situation, the Max situation is kind of out of your hands a little bit. You've now got this situation there. And I think that's actually the harder one to call. I still think Tsunoda's gone either way just because Honda's leaving. I think that is a bigger consideration than anything. And obviously they want to promote Lindblad up, and I think it's actually Yuki to go. And I think Mekies would give Liam maybe a second chance at Red Bull, having seen what he could do at Racing Bulls. I remember Mekies at the time saying it's pretty harsh. He was the one.
He did.
Yeah, and do you remember when Lawson came back and they had that sign out for him in Japan, like, welcome back to the team and stuff like that. People kind of joked about like that was maybe a little bit cringeworthy, but like Mekies was like, well, this is a guy I've got to protect here. He's a young driver. I know how good he is. So I think that has actually maybe changed I think it's a really interesting one for us to put to Liam next week. Maybe without Christian there is maybe a route back to that team for you potentially, because of the fact you have this great relationship with Laurent Mekies and he knows what you are capable of doing. Same for Hadjar, but Lawson especially. And I suppose the same is true for Yuki, but Yuki has the Honda situation over his head, which ultimately I think will hurt him in the longer run.
If Yuki is out, is there a seat for him? An actual race seat, not a test reserve driver. Is there an actual race seat that you can see him falling into for 2026?
If he
Alpine, maybe?
gets, yeah, if he gets the news early enough, then yes. The danger for Yuki is that
Waiting.
Red Bull don't actually tell him whether he's in or out early enough, and therefore he's trying to hold on to a Red Bull seat. But I think the problem with Yuki at the moment is just this stint at Red Bull is really damaging his reputation. If he was still at Racing Bulls, I think he'd be performing better than both Lawson and Hadjar are in that car at the moment. I actually think he's the best driver of those three. So yeah, it's maybe Alpine, but then I think Alpine, if they can get hold of Valtteri, it seems like conversations are going on there, perhaps even this season, and Valtteri goes in and does a good job, then I think that seat, gets sealed off. Alpine are also in that weird flux at the moment in that they're waiting to have the new CEO in at Renault, who's going to make overall decisions on basically what is the future of that team. And so, yeah, that's a tricky situation. And then Yuki would be a pretty good option for Cadillac,
Okay.
again, if he finds out with enough time in advance to be able to negotiate with them. What will be interesting is whether we start to hear that Yuki is actually just going and negotiating with those teams, regardless of the final decision from Red Bull, because that will indicate, like Nate seems to think that, that he's out with Honda. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, if I was in Lauren Mecky's position though, I wouldn't be so keen to get rid of Yuki. He's seen what Yuki can do at Racing Bulls.
True.
He's seen Yuki be the best driver actually at Racing Bulls over the last couple of years. So just to get rid of him because of Honda, I don't know. It seems very short-sighted to me.
The Alpine situation. If Alpine goes the way of Bottas, what does the future look like for Jack Doohan? What does it look like for Colapinto? And then how does that all impact what Cadillac does? Let's just start with the first two. Let's just start with Doohan and Colapinto. If they go by way of Bottas, what does that mean for those two?
I think Colapinto's in an interesting situation, isn't he? Because we know that he can bring a lot of money, sponsorship over. We obviously don't live now in the pay driver era of Formula One, but it's still a big consideration. If you can bring, several $1 million in more than another driver, it instantly gives that driver a bit more cachet. You could see maybe one of them taking on the reserve driver role. I mean, we see that quite often, don't we? Drivers that maybe didn't succeed in the racing role drop to the reserve role. Yeah, I don't know. It depends. If Doohan gets another run with Alpine this year, there's been talk of maybe Colapinto dropping back out. Lawrence alluded to it. There's also talk of Bottas getting that seat, but an easy option for them would be just to go back to Doohan and almost see what they've got there. If Doohan can go back in there and kind of almost, I guess, save his reputation, maybe he can go somewhere else. But I don't see either of those two guys being high on the list of a Cadillac. I don't see them being high on the list of, they're certainly not in the Red Bull orbit. So I think that the two of them are kind of in a bad position because Alpine have much better options on the table. And even if they don't get Bottas, maybe that saves one of them and keeps them there. But I think both were given an opportunity, maybe not the best opportunity they could have had, and didn't do what they could have done with them. So I don't know. It's hard to say. But if I had to pick which of them ends up in, say, a reserve driver role at Alpine, I would still pick Colapinto because of the extra clout he can bring on the money side, which is harsh on Doohan because I don't think we saw Doohan really put in the best position to succeed. But ultimately, he wasn't able to do much with that short opportunity.
The other factor with Franco Colapinto, remember, is that ultimately he's on a Williams contract. So if the door is really closed at Alpine to him racing, then I think he goes back to Williams and sits in the reserve driver role there, which doesn't look that promising because Sainz and Albon are both committed to at least seeing what Williams can do in 2026, but actually seem to be committed a little bit longer term to that project. So it's not a great option for Colapinto. But if it's, reserve driver with no chance of driving at Alpine or reserve driver with no chance of driving at Williams, I think the contract situation actually sends him back to Williams, which then perhaps gives Doohan that reserve driver role. But I mean, what's really frustrating about that situation is that I don't think we've learned anything really about the ultimate potential of either of those two drivers from what we've seen. Yeah, if they'd stuck with Doohan, we'd probably know by now whether there's enough potential to see him through to the end of the year, or whether realistically, as is always the case with every Formula One driver, the results weren't there to justify the place in Formula One. But from what we saw in the first 5 races or 6 races, whatever it was, I don't think we got enough of a view of that. And, having then given it over to Colapinto, I don't think we had enough of a view of Colapinto either. So I think Alpine now in this situation, which I don't know, kind of seemed inevitable at the time. I remember we had these same conversations. And I think for some reason, or maybe with good reason, they felt Colapinto was going to go into that seat and perform, and the decision would be made. And hey, presto, it's nice and easy from that point. But yeah, now to be considering Valtteri Bottas, who of course is reserve driver at Mercedes, Toto's made very clear that he would be willing to let Valtteri out of that reserve driver role if Alpine came knocking and he can go there. Of course, Alpine are taking Mercedes engines next year as well. So there's already kind of, some background to that working as well. Maybe a longer deal with Bottas one way or the other. But to have the situation now where we're none the wiser about Doohan and Colapinto, other than probably, neither of them have really shone in the way that Alpine had hoped, is just real kind of mismanagement on the Alpine side,
Well,
and
okay,
yeah.
so that's what I was going to say because I was the mismanagement aspect of it, and I was talking to two friends, two completely different situations, two different teams, and their quotes about or their reaction to the Colapinto doing situation were almost identical in that you've got two young drivers, you've got both of them making mistakes that they probably wouldn't make, but they're under a tremendous amount of pressure. They're also really not getting the support, and both of them were like, "Well, that's what happens when you don't support a young driver."
Mm.
And the mismanagement in or however you want to characterize it, whatever environment, whatever culture there is over there, it doesn't really lead to being able to go in there with a whole hell of a lot of confidence as a driver and feel like you're supported because I think you feel like if you make one mistake, you're just, that's it, you're done.
Yeah.
And they don't have your back because the track record is they don't really have your back. But I just thought it was interesting from two different perspectives. Well, if you had the driver's backs, maybe they would give you more. That sort of
Yeah.
thing. Um, let's talk about Cadillac for a second. What show was it? Was it you and me last? We were talking, the video came out where Botas,
Bottas. Yeah.
Yeah.
I freaking love that guy in social media. Like just the best. But anyway, he had that video where he was like, "Ooh, that is a cat. Look at this. That's a seat. There are two seats." It was just brilliant. And we both said, one, it's either the negotiations are going well enough where he felt comfortable putting that out there, or the negotiations are not happening and he felt comfortable putting it out there. It appears that though at this point that like it might be like a Botas and Sergio Perez thing. And honestly, in terms of Perez, I think the best thing that could have happened to him is all the malarkey that's gone down this year at Red Bull with the other drivers because suddenly, and you and I, Nate, both said this last week, suddenly Perez ain't looking so bad.
Yeah.
He's not looking like the worst thing in the world because everything that he did last year was almost better than anything that's happened from the second seat this year. I
Yeah.
mean, Yuki's been in the points twice, I
Yeah.
think. I think he's the best he's done is ninth, and I think he has one other 10th. So he's been in the points twice in that car. So Perez ain't looking so bad. How much do you believe that that is what we're going to see next year from Cadillac, a Bottas Perez lineup?
Yeah. I think it's a pretty strong. First of all, it's a pretty strong lineup for a new team. I think I'm convinced one of those drivers will be in one of those seats. I think that is the key question is do we get both of them? We've already alluded to the fact that Bottas might have the option of Alpine,
Mhm.
which arguably from him makes a bit more sense. There's the Mercedes link there, probably likely to be a bit more competitive with Mercedes next year. Gives them a chance. He kind of joined a project when he when he joined Sauber and he was kind of at the back of the field for a bit. And we don't know how good Cadillac are going to be. But yeah, I think Cadillac have made it clear pretty much from the moment they knew Perez was available that he was kind of the number one guy. If you hear, we've got colleagues out in Mexico who say that the deal was pretty much or the conversation started the moment Perez was basically able to talk to anybody else. Which makes a lot of sense as well. You got a North American car brand interested in a very very popular driver from Mexico. So I would pretty confidently state Perez will be there. And then I think the Bottas thing is just based on does he have a better opportunity elsewhere? Maybe the same is true of Perez, but I think the Alpine Bottas link, and Lawrence might be able to correct me, but that seems to be a bit stronger than any suggestion of Alpine and Perez. Um, but then if Bottas doesn't go there, that's when it gets interesting to Cadillac because you look at the likes of Guan Yu Zhou. I saw Mick Schumacher skulking around at the Cadillac launch party that we went to in Miami. He was kind of hiding away, saw me, and I don't know whether it was related, but he kind of ducked behind the person he was with because I don't know if he thought I was with Chris Medland at the time, another journalist. I don't know if he thought we'd take a picture, but I was like, well, I've seen you, Mick, and it's fine. But I know he's been what Cadillac have actually been very clever about doing is they've talked to a lot of drivers. I mean, they've been talking to Formula 2 drivers. They've been talking to Mick Schumacher. So the reason that earlier I mentioned about Yuki leaving, I think his agent had a very brief conversation with Cadillac in Monaco. Again, all kind of standard stuff in the Formula One paddock, but it shows you they have cast their net as wide as they can, and they've said we want to talk to every driver available. And I think that they're actually going to end up with quite an interesting roster if they don't get Bottas next season. There's also Jack Crawford, who's an American who's second in the Formula 2 Championship at the moment. I think he's quite keen to be involved in that project somehow. Maybe a reserve driver role is more likely for him. But yeah, they're kind of in a good position, aren't they, Cadillac? Because they do have a decent selection of drivers, if not the best drivers you're going to get. but they've got a decent selection of drivers, and actually it might be an easy call for them. But if Bottas isn't there, I think there's still enough interesting picks that they go
Mhm.
for that might excite people.
Yeah, I think the other thing is what Cadillac can offer is a bit of security to any of those drivers. So if Bottas is talking to Alpine, it may only be for a single year, or it might be this year as a trial to see if he can then get an extension on a longer contract. Whereas with Cadillac, you feel like the limiting factor for them is not going to be the drivers, it's going to be the performance of the car, just because of the limited time they've had to prepare for this season. You know, it's just such an uphill struggle. And any driver going there, of course, would want a longer deal, because you want to be part of a project and you want to reap the rewards when potentially it moves forward in a few years' time. So that will be interesting. And then from a Cadillac perspective, you want drivers with experience. So, you know, I think that's the best way to push a car forward up the grid, to understand its weak points, is having two drivers who have seen it all. You know, it's a new regulation set next year, but still there'll be lessons from previous regulation sets that can be applied to that new car. So that'll be a big factor. And then, yeah, the other thing, you know, to go back to what we're talking about earlier, when Red Bull make a decision on what they're doing, assuming Lindblad does move up into Racing Bulls, that's one driver back on the market, as Nate said, could well be Sonoda. And then you've got, you know, potentially a good driver there. So, yeah, I think Cadillac can continue to be a little bit kind of, you know, take their time over it. It's the impression I got from visiting the factory a couple of weeks ago, is that drivers, you know, from the outside world, is what we all want to know, because those are going to be the two figureheads of this team going into 26. But from internally, that's not at all the biggest concern. You know, just getting the cars ready, making sure all crash tests are passed. They've actually made some progress with that already, with a proof of concept chassis that they have in a hangar or in a warehouse in Silverstone already, and they've been doing crash tests on that. So, but there's just so many things they need to get lined up. And if they wait until the end of this season to see who's left on the drive market, I think that will be fine, because there's most likely going to be either Bottas or Perez available, probably going to be Perez. And then you can fill in with a second driver. There's enough talent out there. That's not a major issue. So, yeah, kind of one of those ones to watch the space, but I think perhaps one that will be the last one to fill in, unless they've decided they really want Valtteri and they're worried that he might end up at Alpine.
Before we go, because we like to do this, it's more like torture. Give us a bold prediction for 2026 that will absolutely hold you two and bring it back and be like, you were right, you were wrong.
I'll double down on what I said earlier. I think Max Verstappen signs a new Red Bull contract. Maybe not this season, but maybe, are we doing in 26 or for 26?
One bold prediction for
Oh, 4. Okay,
2026.
because I don't think he'd do
Four.
that until next year. I would say Bottas to Alpine. I don't know how bold that is, but it seems like that's like against the the Cadillac mold. I just don't think Verstappen's going anywhere for 26.
I mean,
Now
if
you've
we're
got to
just
be
doing bold, then
yeah.
without kind of any sourcing or kind of real belief in it, then Max to Mercedes has got to be, you know,
That's
the
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 boldest.
boldest position we win. But even that wouldn't be that surprising, would it? After all the conversations we've had up to this point. Yeah, it's a
I
funny
think
one because
it's actually bolder to say he's going to stay. That's the thing. I do
yeah,
think
maybe
that is the call that is against against the kind of the grain at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I believe he will stay. But yeah, just as a bold prediction. I mean, Hadjar in a Red Bull winning races,
Mm.
you know, no one would have seen that a year ago, but even that would be like, you know, there's reasons to believe that could happen. I think it's because we got quite a lot of the grid locked down. It's quite hard to really just focus on this is the one, you know,
Yeah.
big thing that's gonna change it. I mean, I guess again, if you want to go bold, Fernando Alonso is not driving in Formula One because he's being replaced by either George Russell or Max
Why?
Verstappen.
Why are you stealing my things again? Why? I was like, I'm gonna go
Great
George
minds,
Aston Martin.
Nicole.
My God.
Great minds,
Uh,
Nicole.
although I do think I bettered you the last time we had to make podium predictions.
Yes,
I
We're
don't
probably.
gonna
want to talk
have to
about
revisit
I don't
We
want
that.
to
do
talk
this
about the
every
podium
time, actually.
predictions.
We're gonna
I'm
have to
having a mare.
revisit that next week. We still don't have to do it yet. Enjoy the next weekend off here, because then you got a couple and then there's a break. But enjoy this last little bit here. For those of you listening or watching, thank you. Make sure you tune in next week. We actually have a race to talk about next week because it's the spot race weekend. So we will stop talking about the silly stuff and actually get to the racing stuff. Remember, leave a comment, hit that like button, like and subscribe to the ESPN F1 YouTube channel. And if you're listening, just remember that we're here every single week. Unlapped is presented by Oracle. Right now, Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to OCI. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/unlapped. Gentlemen, both of you next week?
Yes, I believe so.
Should be.
Planning to do.
Win. See you later.